Taking over St. Michael's Hospital in Riverwood felt more like inheriting a ghost town than a valuable property passed down from a distant relative. In early 2023, my primary goal was straightforward: renovate the space and sell it for a reasonable profit. However, this grand old building had different plans. Steeped in shadows and whispers of the past, the East Wing was my first obstacle. The rusted gates groaned painfully as they swung open, almost as if warning me to turn back. As I pushed through the main entrance, a cool draft of stale air enveloped me, thick with years of dust. The corridors were lined with rooms that seemed frozen in time. Beds half-made, chairs slightly pulled away from their desks, and a layer of dust blanketing everything like a shroud. With each step deeper into this abandoned wing, the air grew colder, and silence pressed against my ears. Faint whispers brushed against my consciousness, so subtle that I questioned my sanity. Shadows flickered just beyond my flashlight's reach, darting away whenever I tried to focus. It felt as if the building itself was alive, aware of my presence, watching closely. As I ventured further, the atmosphere thickened, charged with an unexplainable tension. Then, in the dim glow of my weakening flashlight, I spotted something unsettling. A child's rag doll lying in the middle of the hallway. It wasn't merely discarded. It was placed there with eerie precision, waiting for someone to find it. Its glossy eyes glinted in the light, sending a chill down my spine. As I bent to pick it up, the corridor darkened further, and the temperature around me dropped, a cold that seeped into my very bones. A child's laughter, light yet haunting, echoed down the hall, a sound that shouldn't exist in such a derelict place. Picking up the rag doll felt like crossing an invisible threshold. The laughter faded as abruptly as it had appeared, swallowed by the heavy silence that reclaimed its oppressive hold on the wing. Clutching the doll, I pressed on, my flashlight illuminating more of the hospital's abandoned core. The air became denser, imbued with a palpable dread that clung to the walls. Soon, the occasional whisper grew into a chorus of hushed voices, as if the shadows were sharing secrets. With each step, the sensation of being watched intensified, the feeling that I was not alone in these forsaken halls growing stronger. My heart raced in my chest, a relentless reminder of the fear that now enveloped me. Turning a corner, I stumbled upon a room that felt different from the rest. The door was slightly ajar, inviting yet foreboding. Pushing it open, I entered what appeared to be a children's ward, toys scattered across the floor and faded drawings still adorning the walls, their cheerful colors remaining in the still air. In the center of the room stood a rocking horse, gently swaying back and forth as if just vacated. The atmosphere was thick with the echoes of laughter and play, now mere memories hanging in the dusty air. I placed the rag doll on a small bed with a creaky metal frame that creaked under its weight. The moment the doll touched the bed, the air shifted. A cold breeze brushed against my skin. Spinning around, my flashlight cast wild shadows on the walls, and for a fleeting moment, I thought I saw a child at the far end of the room, watching me. But when I blinked, it was gone, leaving only a lingering sense of sadness. Shaken, I decided it was time to leave, but the hospital seemed to have other ideas. As I retraced my steps toward the exit, the whispers grew louder, more insistent, urging me to stay. A siren call that tugged at the edges of my mind. Panic surged as I increased my pace, only to find that the hallways had subtly shifted, paths that should have led back to the entrance now looping into long, winding corridors. Desperate, I flung open door after door, each one revealing empty rooms that mirrored the last, trapping me in a maze of sameness. Finally, after what felt like hours, I discovered a staircase leading upward. As I climbed, I emerged into the main lobby. The morning light streamed through the shattered windows, creating a striking contrast with the gloom behind me. I breathed heavily, feeling relieved yet unsettled. It dawned on me that the hospital wasn't just a structure. It was a vault of stories, each waiting in the darkness for someone to hear. As I locked the door to the east wing of St. Michael Hospital behind me, the weight of those unspoken tales settled heavily on my shoulders, a burden I now bore. The following night, my curiosity, Maybe it was the lingering unease from my earlier encounter. Pulled me back to St. Michael. This time, I was intent on delving deeper, both figuratively and literally. Whispers suggested that an old maintenance tunnel wound beneath the hospital, a remnant from an era when such passages were vital to its operation. Armed with a stronger flashlight and a firmer resolve, I descended into the hospital's lower levels. The air became cooler, and the scent of dampness and decay intensified as I navigated the narrow staircase, each step echoing ominously around me, as if heralding my arrival in the building's bowels. The staircase opened into an elongated corridor, its walls adorned with pipes and cables, a testament to decades of alterations and repairs. I had scarcely moved a few steps when I heard it, a faint echo that mirrored my movements. I paused and it paused. I took a step and it followed. The sound was disconcertingly precise, reflecting my actions perfectly. What began as curiosity morphed into unease as the echoes gained a life of their own, growing louder and more distinct the further I ventured. The corridor branched off in different directions, making my choice feel like a gamble, each turn a roll of the dice. The echoes not only mimicked my steps now but also led the way, as if something or someone was walking ahead of me, drawing me deeper into the darkness. Driven by a mix of fear and fascination, I pressed on until I reached a section of the tunnel where the echoes suddenly amplified, bouncing off the walls with such intensity that it disoriented me. Here, the corridor came to an abrupt end at a heavy metal door, rusted and cold to the touch. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open, revealing an old service room cluttered with outdated electrical panels and forgotten tools. The echoes swirled around the room like a chaotic storm. As I stepped inside, the door slammed shut behind me with a definitive bang that reverberated through my bones. The room felt alive, vibrating with the echoes of the hospital's hidden core. Panic surged within me as I rushed to the door, only to find it immovable, sealing me in. The echoes transformed, becoming something darker, as twisted and menacing voices began to emerge from the cacophony, whispering threats that chilled me to the core. As the whispers intensified, morphing into distinct menacing voices, a chilling realization washed over me. These were not mere echoes. They were memories, perhaps even spirits of those who had previously toiled in the depths of St. Michael, now trapped in the dark, forgotten corridors. Their voices surrounded me, each word dripping with a malevolent intent that seemed to draw strength from my fear. Desperate, I scanned the room for any possible escape, a vent, a window, anything, but the service room was a secured and isolated box. The voices grew louder, their words clear and terrifying. "Don't leave us," they hissed. "Stay here with us." The atmosphere thickened, laden with despair and malice, as if the room itself sought to keep me, to add me to its collection of lost souls. That I pressed against the cold metal door, my only barrier against the nightmarish chorus that surrounded me. My breaths came in short, sharp gasps as I slid down to the floor, the weight of the situation pressing in on me. But surrender was not an option. Gathering my courage, I stood to confront the unseen horrors with a resolve that felt fragile. "I am not one of you," I declared, my voice shaky but loud. "I will not stay." To my astonishment, the voices faltered, a momentary silence falling over the room, and in that brief moment of calm, I noticed the old panels softly buzzing, indicating that power still coursed through parts of this forgotten place. A wild plan, filled with uncertainty, ignited in my mind. It was all I had to hold on to. As I approached the panels, the chaotic voices resumed their clamor, trying to drown out my thoughts. Ignoring them, I traced the wires, searching for any that were frayed or exposed. My hands eventually found a loose connection, and with a deep breath, I pulled it free, resulting in a spark that plunged the room into darkness. The voices halted as suddenly as they had started. In the ensuing silence, I cautiously made my way back to the door, my hands trembling as I fumbled for the handle. To my immense relief, it turned, and the door creaked open, sounding like the sweetest music. I stumbled into the corridor, where the faint beam from my forgotten flashlight served as a beacon guiding me back to the surface. As I emerged from the underground labyrinth, The fresh night air felt like a rebirth. The voices had disappeared, silenced either by my escape or my refusal to succumb to their despair. Looking back at the dark entrance of the tunnels sent a shiver down my spine. I knew I would face something extraordinary, an experience that would linger at the edges of my thoughts, always just a whisper away from memory. After the harrowing events beneath St. Michael, one might think I would avoid the place, but there was something about that hospital that drew you in, as enticing as any siren's call. This time, I ventured into the old maternity ward, a space shaped by decades of joy and sorrow, now shrouded in silence. The maternity ward was situated on the 3rd floor, its windows boarded up and casting deep shadows across the faded wallpaper. As I entered, the air felt heavy, thick with the echoes of past lives. The once cheerful room, designed to celebrate new beginnings, now held an eerie stillness, blanketing the outside world in profound quiet. In the dim light, I noticed something peculiar about room 33. The door was slightly ajar, unusual since I had ensured all entrances were secured during my last round. When I pushed it open, the first thing that caught my eye was a large mirror hanging opposite the entrance. Unlike the dust-covered surfaces surrounding it, this mirror was impeccably clean, reflecting a darker, almost sinister version of the room. As I moved closer, the air grew colder, and a prickling sensation crept up the back of my neck. The reflection in the mirror did not match my movements. Instead, it displayed a version of the room seemingly frozen in time, unveiling scenes of sorrow and pain that had unfolded in this very space. Each step I took was followed by a disorienting lag in the reflection, drawing me deeper into its grasp. Hypnotized by the mirror, I watched as the scenes shifted, becoming more intense and real. It felt as if the mirror was revealing the past rather than simply reflecting it. I saw a young woman in labor, her face twisted in agony and fear, while nurses bustled about, urgency enveloping the air. Then, just as quickly as it emerged, the scene changed to a joyful one. New parents cradling their newborn, smiles illuminating their exhausted faces. But peace was fleeting. The surface of the mirror rippled like disturbed water, and the reflections darkened. Joyful moments faded, replaced by expressions of loss and despair. I struggled to breathe as the mirror continued its haunting display, each shift serving as a glimpse into the soul of St. Michael, revealing deeper layers of a history steeped in both joy and tragedy. The room around me felt electrified, as if decades of births and losses were seeping out from the very walls, converging on the mirror as the focal point of all that energy. As I stood there entranced, the reflections took a darker turn, with happy scenes becoming increasingly rare, overshadowed by moments of intense sorrow and panic. I felt powerless as I watched a reflection of a couple receiving the devastating news that their child hadn't survived. Their grief was palpable. The mother's sorrowful expression and the father's defeated posture were so vivid that tears welled up in my own eyes. But then the reflection changed, and I saw myself in the mirror, not as I appeared but standing further back in the room. My face showed confusion and horror, and the dissonance between where I really stood and my reflected position unnerved me. It felt as if the mirror was not only revealing past events or possible realities, but was also distorting the present. The air grew colder, sending a shiver down my spine as I realized the mirror was no longer just displaying scenes. It was responding to my presence, pulling me into its depths. The scenes began to speed up, merging into a whirlwind of emotions, each more intense than the last. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in, driven by the crescendo of echoes from the mirror. In a moment of panic, I reached out to touch the glass, half expecting my hand to pass through into another realm. But as my fingers made contact, the cold surface felt shockingly solid, and the room returned to normal. The reflection stopped abruptly, leaving just my wide-eyed pale face staring back at me. Realizing the danger of becoming too involved with the mirror's power, I took several steps back. The room felt ordinary again, but the residue of the emotions stirred by the reflections lingered in the air. I understood then that some aspects of St. Michael's were better left unexplored, their secrets too heavy for a single person to carry. With one last weary glance at the now inert mirror, I left room 33, gently closing the door behind me. The echo of the latch clicking felt louder than ever, marking a definitive end to an unforgettable encounter. As I walked away, the weight of the hospital's hidden stories pressed down on me, a reminder that not all reflections are meant to be seen, and not all echoes are meant to be followed. After my unsettling experience in room 33, I was almost ready to give up my nightly explorations of St. Michael's. However, a peculiar tale from the old records piqued my curiosity. A clock that could turn back time. It was said to be in the old records room, a place where time seemed to stand still, buried beneath layers of forgotten paperwork and relics from the hospital's long history. That night, under the light of a crescent moon, I made my way to the records room, tucked away in a secluded part of the hospital that few had visited in years. The door creaked open reluctantly, as if warning me of the secrets inside. The room was cluttered with filing cabinets, medical equipment, and piles of documents that might as well have been ancient hieroglyphics. In the far corner stood the clock, an imposing grandfather clock, its wood intricately carved yet dulled by decades of dust. What struck me was that its pendulum swung left instead of right, and its hands moved counterclockwise. The air around it felt thick, charged with static that raised the hairs on my arms as I approached. Each step felt heavier, as if I were walking through water, and the sensation of time distorting grew stronger, blurring the past and present into a dizzying vortex. I reached out to touch the clock, half expecting to be drawn into another era. The moment my fingers grazed the pendulum, the air turned cold, and silence enveloped the room. Suddenly, the clock's hands began to spin wildly. The ticking grew louder, almost deafening. Documents and dust swirled around me, caught in a temporal storm I had inadvertently unleashed. As the hands of the clock spun in reverse, the swirling papers began to settle, each sheet falling like a leaf in autumn, slowly and gracefully. It felt as if the room itself was breathing in the years, inhaling the past deeply. I watched, transfixed, as the dust retracted and the air cleared, revealing the room as it might have been decades ago. Pristine and orderly, the ticking of the clock resonated throughout the space, a metronome of the past that seemed to draw me in deeper to its mysteries. Images flashed before me, like fragments of forgotten dreams. Doctors hurrying through corridors, nurses caring for patients, and the mingling echoes of laughter and sorrow filled the air. It was a vivid tapestry of St. Michael's history, unfolding around me, anchored by the steady beat of the backward ticking clock. Drawn in by the scenes around me, I moved closer to the clock, each step echoing strangely in the now vibrant room. I noticed that the documents and items scattered about were no longer just relics. They pulsed with their original purpose, medical tools glinting in the lamplight and papers filled with fresh ink, as if recently written. However, the wonder of this temporal resurrection was overshadowed by a growing unease. The clock's influence felt boundless, and I worried about the implications of its power. Could it truly reverse time, or was it merely creating illusions? I needed to comprehend the extent of its abilities. With cautious fingers, I touched the clock's face, halting its hands. The room shuddered, and the air snapped back to its former state, the illusion or reality breaking apart. Dust resettled, and silence descended, now heavier with the lingering presence of the past. Realizing the potential danger of tampering further, I chose to leave the clock undisturbed. Its secrets felt too potent to meddle with. As I stepped out of the records room, I couldn't shake the sensation that I had merely scratched the surface of something profound. The clock had granted me a glimpse into history, but at what cost? The boundary between past and present seemed thinner, more fragile. As I locked the door behind me, the clock's final tick echoed through the hallway, a solemn reminder of time's fleeting nature and the shadows it casts. I knew I would soon return to my usual duties, but St. Michael's had transformed for me. It was no longer just a building of brick and mortar. It had become a keeper of time, holding its breath for the next curious soul willing to disturb it. Driven by the eerie experiences with the clock, my explorations of St. Michael's became a nightly obsession. Every corner of the old hospital appeared to whisper secrets, beckoning me further into its forgotten lore. On a particularly stormy night in late October, I decided to venture into an area even the daytime staff avoided: the old archive room. It was said to hold records and personal belongings of patients long since passed. As I unlocked the heavy door, the hinges creaked under the weight of years, and a musty, bookish scent mixed with the damp air from the storm outside. Inside, the room was a labyrinth of towering shelves, each laden with dusty files and dimly illuminated by the flickering light of my lantern. The shadows cast by the shelves danced as the light moved, creating an illusion of movement in my peripheral vision. I ventured deeper into the room, drawn by the allure of discovery. That's when I found it: an old journal with a worn leather cover tucked away in a forgotten drawer. It belonged to a former cleaner of the hospital named Thomas, who had mysteriously vanished decades ago. His entries were meticulous, detailing daily routines and unusual encounters within St. Michael's. As I flipped through the yellowed pages, a chill ran down my spine. Thomas's entries became increasingly erratic, his handwriting more frantic. He wrote of hearing whispers and seeing figures in the shadows that no one else could detect. His last entry was a hastily scrawled warning: "They are real, and they are here." Intrigued yet unnerved, I continued to read, using the lantern to illuminate the increasingly desperate words. Suddenly, the light flickered violently, as if responding to the tension in Thomas's entries. The shadows in the room deepened, forming darker shapes that seemed almost human. As they gathered, a tangible dread filled the archive room, and the lantern's light stabilized momentarily, casting eerie, elongated shadows against the dusty shelves. I felt as though the shadows were sentient beings, hovering just out of reach of the light. The air was thick with the echoes of Thomas's warnings. Each word resonated more deeply as the room felt like it was closing in on me. With Thomas's journal in hand, I sat against a stack of old patient files, my mind racing with thoughts of the cleaner's fate. As I continued to read, Thomas described how the shadows began to whisper to him, voices only he could hear, revealing secrets of the past, making promises of hidden truths, and eventually issuing threats. His notes became a mixture of fear and obsession, a chronicle of a man gradually consumed by the very shadows he feared. The room grew colder, the air denser, as if the essence of the place was seeping into my bones. It was at that moment I noticed the shadows shifting independently of any light source, swirling around the room's edges and drawing closer with each passing minute. The whispers Thomas had written about filled the air, a cacophony of hushed, indecipherable sounds that made my head spin. Driven by a blend of fear and determination, I stood up, clutching Thomas's journal tightly. I decided to confront whatever manifested in the shadows. "I know you're here," I called out, my voice steady despite the trembling in my limbs. "What do you want?" The whispers halted abruptly, and for a moment, silence enveloped the room. Then a single voice emerged from the darkness, clearer and more coherent than the rest. "We are the forgotten," it said, "the ones who linger in the corridors of time, bound by our unresolved pasts. We seek release." Understanding dawned on me. The shadows were not merely remnants of darkness but manifestations of the unresolved spirits of St. Michael, trapped within the walls of the hospital. They had been drawn to Thomas and now to me because of our ability to perceive them. "I will help you," I whispered, unsure how, but feeling a commitment to these lost souls. In acknowledgement, the shadows receded slightly, lifting the oppressive atmosphere just enough for me to breathe easier. That night, I left the archive room with Thomas's journal and a new purpose, realizing that my connection to St. Michael was deeper and more complex than I had ever imagined. Motivated by my newfound resolve to help the trapped spirits of St. Michael, I sought deeper knowledge about the hospital's mysterious past. It was during one particularly quiet night in November that I stumbled upon an old employee ledger tucked away in the basement archives. Among the faded entries, one name stood out: William, a night watchman who had reportedly served the hospital for over 30 years before his disappearance in 1954. Intrigued by William's long tenure and sudden vanishing, I decided to investigate his history, hoping it would shed light on the supernatural occurrences I had encountered. The ledger led me to a storage room that contained personal effects left behind by past employees. Amidst the clutter, I discovered a box marked with William's name, filled with belongings that seemed frozen in time. A tarnished whistle, a set of rusted keys, and a weathered photograph of a man with a stern yet kind face. As I examined the photograph, the air around me chilled, and I sensed a presence in the room. Turning around, I found myself face to face with an elderly man in a faded uniform, his appearance strikingly similar to the man in the photograph. "William," I ventured, my voice barely above a whisper. The figure nodded, a ghostly smile spreading across his face. "Yes, it's been a long while since anyone has spoken my name," he replied, his voice echoing as if from a distance. "I've watched over this place, unseen and unheard, for decades." Curiosity and apprehension swirled within me as William's translucent form shimmered in the dim light, seemingly tethered to the room, unable to leave. "What keeps you here?" I asked, my investigative instincts kicking in. "I'm bound to the secrets of St. Michael," William explained, his gaze distant. "I've witnessed things that should have passed with time but have instead lingered, festering in the shadows." William gestured for me to follow him deeper into the storage room, where the shadows seemed to swirl with a life of their own, and as we moved through the hospital, William began to share stories from its history, his voice a low murmur blending with the creaks and groans of the aging building. St. Michael wasn't merely a place for healing. It served as a crossroads for countless souls, some of whom left more behind than mere memories. He halted in front of an old, large map of the hospital on the wall, its edges yellowed and curling. He pointed out several areas marked in red, locations where the veil between worlds was thin, where emotions and events had left a lasting imprint. I listened, both fascinated and horrified, as William recounted incidents of miraculous recoveries, tragic losses, and unexplained phenomena that were never officially documented. His tales painted a picture of a place defined by both compassion and calamity. "But why are you still here?" I asked, my voice echoing slightly in the cramped space. William's expression grew serious. "My duty is to protect this place and its inhabitants, both in life and beyond. Even in death, I feel compelled to remain to ensure that the secrets and spirits here are honored," he explained, his eyes reflecting a sadness born of years of solitude. "But you're trapped, aren't you?" I probed, connecting the dots between my own experiences and his stories. "Yes," he admitted with a resigned nod. "I cannot leave until I am sure someone will take over the guardianship of this place. Someone who sees beyond the surface, who can hear the whispers of the past." A chill ran through me as I grasped the implication of his words. Was William suggesting I inherit his responsibility? The thought was daunting, yet a part of me was drawn to the mystery and the desire to assist him. "I need to think about this," I said, stepping back slightly. "This is a lot to take on." "I understand," he replied softly. "But know this, you are not alone. The spirits recognize your efforts and appreciate your respect for their stories. You have a gift, the ability to bring about positive change here." As we left the storage room, William's form began to fade, merging with the dimming light. "Contemplate it, but remember that time here is not like time outside. It bends, it waits, but it does not pause forever." Left in solitude, I pondered his words, the weight of history and duty pressing down on me. St. Michael was more than just a series of walls and faded memories. It was a sanctuary for souls caught between worlds. Perhaps it was now my turn to watch over them. The weight of William's parting words lingered as I continued my nightly rounds at St. Michael. The hospital's corridors felt even more laden with silent stories whispering through the air. One chilly evening in December, a persistent draft led me to stand before the old ventilation system, its grates coated in decades of dust and neglect. Curiosity, now a constant companion, pushed me to explore the ventilation shafts that snaked like arteries through the hospital's aging structure. Armed with a flashlight and a screwdriver, I pried open one of the grates and peered inside. The narrow passage was darker than the deepest night, and as I shone my light down the duct, I heard it, a faint whispering, as if carried on a breeze from nowhere. The whispers were disjointed, a mix of pleas and sighs that felt both ancient and urgent. The sound drew me in, compelling me to enter the shaft. As I crawled through the tight space, the whispers grew louder and more coherent, speaking of hidden things, secrets tucked away in the hospital's dark recesses. Navigating the labyrinthine ductwork, I followed the voices, each turn and twist taking me deeper into the building's hidden veins. The further I went, the colder the air became until my breath fogged in the beam of my flashlight. Then, without warning, the shaft opened into a vast hidden chamber, lost to time and memory. This forgotten room felt different from any other part of the hospital I had encountered. The walls were lined with old, peeling murals illustrating various aspects of healing and medicine. In the center of the room, beneath a section of the roof that had caved in, lay a jumble of old hospital records and equipment, as if someone had abandoned them in a hurry. In the dim light, the murals seemed to pulse with a life of their own, as if responding to the presence of an outsider. Drawn to the records, I knelt down to investigate, uncovering patient files, faded photographs, and even some personal letters, all appearing to date back decades. Each item was a fragment of the hospital's essence, a snapshot of the lives that had passed through these halls. The whispers intensified, now clear and almost pleading, emanating from the records themselves. Each voice struggled to share its story, revealing hidden pain or forgotten joy. When I touched an especially old file, the room suddenly grew colder, and a gust of wind fluttered the pages, exposing a handwritten note tucked between the sheets. It was from a nurse to her colleague, detailing a mysterious patient who had vanished without a trace one stormy night, leaving behind a chilling message: "Find me where the whispers grow." Startled by the implications of the note, I carefully returned the file, my mind racing with questions. Who was this patient, and what had transpired in this hidden chamber? The whispers seemed to swirl around me, each voice a plea for discovery and closure. Determined to unravel the mystery, I gathered several of the most intact files and prepared to leave. As I turned to exit, the murals caught my eye again in the flickering light. I could have sworn the figures depicted were watching me, their painted eyes following my every move. The sensation was unsettling, prompting me to quicken my pace, and the voices in the ventilation faded behind me as I crawled back to the familiar parts of the hospital. Once outside the shaft, I took a deep breath of cleaner air, the weight of the hidden room's atmosphere still pressing on my lungs. St. Michael held more secrets than I had ever imagined, each one leading deeper into its shadowy heart. Armed with the files and fueled by a resolve to uncover the truth, I knew my journey at St. Michael was far from over. The whispers had promised as much, each one a thread in a larger tapestry slowly unraveling before me. The mysteries of St. Michael seemed endless, with each corner of the hospital revealing deeper enigmas wrapped in whispers and shadows. Following my unsettling discoveries in the hidden ventilation chamber, my curiosity led me to the old chapel, a part of the hospital that had been abandoned for years, yet occasionally emitted sounds that drifted through the corridors at night. On a cold January evening, armed only with my flashlight and the determination that had grown from my recent encounters, I pushed open the heavy wooden doors of the chapel. The air inside was stale, thick with the scent of old incense and dust. The pews were lined in perfect rows, untouched by time, facing the altar where a large statue of an angel stood. The statue, crafted from white marble, depicted an angel with outstretched wings and a serene expression. However, what drew my attention was not just its craftsmanship, but the fact that the statue's eyes seemed moist, as if on the verge of tears. Intrigued and somewhat disturbed, I approached the statue. As I drew closer, I noticed that the ground around its base was damp, with small puddles reflecting the faint light of my flashlight. Looking up, I saw that tears were indeed streaming down the angel's cheeks, a sight that defied explanation. The whispers began, soft and sorrowful, emanating from the statue itself. They spoke of grief and loss, echoing the stories of countless souls who had sought solace within the hospital's doors but found none. The tears of the statue appeared to carry the weight of their unshed sorrows, each drop a testament to their lingering pain. Captivated by the crying statue, I felt the atmosphere in the chapel shift, The air grew colder, and my flashlight flickered as if being slowly drained. The whispers grew louder, filling the space with a mournful chorus, compelling me to remain in the presence of this haunting scene. I hesitantly reached out to touch a tear on the statue's cheek. The moment my fingers made contact with the moistness, a rush of emotions surged through me. Sadness, longing, despair. More intense than anything I had ever felt. It was as if the statue was channeling the collective grief of everyone who had sought solace in this sacred space. The crying intensified, and the tears flowed more freely, as if my presence had unlocked a hidden well of stored sorrow. Each drop reverberated with the echoes of past prayers and pleas, the chapel's walls resonating with the silent cries of the heartbroken. Overcome by this emotional wave, I stepped back, and that's when I noticed the chapel's floor tiles. Under the reflected light from the tears, subtle patterns emerged, leading me toward the altar. Guided by this discovery, I followed the intricate tile design, each step softly echoing in the vast, empty chapel. Upon reaching the altar, I discovered a hidden compartment beneath the statue, cleverly concealed within the design. Inside, old leather-bound books and scrolls awaited, records of the hospital's spiritual history, notes on patients who had sought refuge here, and letters from loved ones left behind. As I flipped through the pages, I realized these were not merely records. They were unspoken contracts of care and confidentiality, promises made to individuals at their most vulnerable. The weight of emotion tied to these documents explained the statue's tears. They were a manifestation of the chapel's role as a guardian of secrets and burdens. As I absorbed the significance of what lay in my hands, the whispers lessened, and the chapel fell silent. The statue's tears slowed, and a faint peace settled in, as if acknowledging its hidden truths had restored balance. Leaving the chapel, I felt a deep connection to those who had entered its doors. This experience had transformed me, strengthening my determination to uncover all of St. Michael's secrets, no matter how buried or painful they might be. After the emotional revelations in the chapel, my bond with St. Michael deepened, drawing me further into its mysteries. One particularly foggy evening in February, driven by an insatiable curiosity, I ventured toward a rarely visited section of the hospital, the long corridor of the West Wing, known among the staff for its eerie, unsettling aura. As I approached, the lights flickered ominously, casting long, darting shadows on the walls. The hallway stretched ahead, creating an illusion that defied the building's architectural proportions, making it seem as if the end was perpetually receding. The air was cool and still, carrying a faint hum, like the whispers of distant voices. With each step, my footsteps muffled by the thick carpet, a growing sense of unease enveloped me. The walls were lined with old portraits and landscapes, their colors faded and blurred by time, watching me with silent, judging eyes. Suddenly, a cold draft swept down the corridor, causing the hanging light fixtures to sway gently. The temperature dropped sharply, and my breath became visible, a mist in the air. The corridor seemed to narrow, the ceiling pressing down and creating a claustrophobic tunnel. With every step, the lights dimmed further, and the edges of my vision darkened. Determined to discover the source of the corridor's oddity, I pressed on, even as the faint hum transformed into discernible whispers, fragments of past conversations, echoes of footsteps that were not my own. It felt like the corridor possessed a life of its own, a living entity filled with memories. As I continued deeper, the whispers congealed into something more coherent, as if the hallway itself was speaking, urging me to turn back. The suggestion came tinged with an urgent warning. Yet, driven by a mix of fear and determination, I pressed forward, my resolve strengthening with each step. In response to my defiance, the corridor seemed to react. The walls subtly shifted and elongated, the portraits blurring into smears of color with their eyes becoming indistinct, their forms stretching and distorting as though mirroring the warped reality of this space. It felt like I was navigating a living dream, or perhaps a nightmare, where the laws of physics and time no longer seemed to apply. I reached a point where the light from the entrance shrank to a mere pinprick behind me, and ahead lay a corridor engulfed in impenetrable darkness. Taking out a small flashlight, I clicked it on, the beam slicing through the shadows. The light flickered, struggling against the oppressive gloom. Yet it prevailed, casting eerie shadows that danced across the walls. Suddenly, a door to my left creaked open slowly, a completely unexpected occurrence since no other doors had appeared along this seemingly endless stretch. Tentatively, I approached, the whispers that had filled the air now silent as if they held their breath. The room beyond the door was ensconced in shadows, but whatever little light there was unveiled a dusty, untouched office that seemed frozen in time, with scattered papers and a clock that had stopped. In the midst of my exploration, I came across journals and maps detailing the layout of the hospital, revealing sections and passageways that had vanished from the modern blueprints. Among these documents was a faded photograph depicting a group of staff members from the 1940s, proudly standing in front of this very corridor, looking significantly shorter and more proportionate than my current experience. This discovery sent a chill down my spine. Had the corridor been intentionally altered? And for what purpose? Suddenly, the air around me turned icy, the darkness pressing in closer. The voice returned, now a clear, commanding shout, "Leave now!" Heeding the warning, I retreated from the room, and the door slammed shut behind me with such force that it sent a gust of wind rushing down the corridor. The way back suddenly cleared, the hallway contracting to its normal size, as if whatever force had manipulated it had finally released its grip. Once I exited, the normal sounds of St. Michael Hospital rushed back to me, a stark contrast to the silence of the corridor. My heart raced with adrenaline, and my mind was flooded with questions. What secrets did St. Michael still conceal, and what dangers lay within those secrets? Encounters with the endless corridor had left me with more questions than answers. However, my determination to uncover the mysteries of St. Michael intensified. One dreary night in March, I found myself irresistibly drawn to one of the more foreboding areas of the hospital, the morgue. Despite its chilling reputation, I was determined to explore every corner of this haunted place. The morgue, located in the basement, was a seldom visited site since the hospital's closure. The air was frigid, imbued with the unmistakable scent of formaldehyde and decay, a reminder of its grim function. As the clock struck midnight, the heavy silence felt heavier, only disturbed by the distant sound of dripping water. Taking a deep breath, I pushed open the heavy door, the creak echoing ominously through the empty halls. Inside, the morgue was exactly what one would expect. Stainless steel tables dimly lit by flickering overhead lights, with rows of cadaver drawers lining the wall. The atmosphere was oppressive, each drawer a silent testament to the mysteries surrounding death. Compelled by morbid curiosity, I approached the drawers. To my surprise, despite the hospital's long abandonment, the handles were cold but not dusty, as if they had been used recently. With a hesitant hand, I pulled open one of the drawers. Instead of the emptiness I had anticipated, I found it occupied by a perfectly preserved body, appearing as though it had been placed there just moments ago. The sight was shocking, a chill running down my spine. The body looked peaceful, as if merely asleep, but the reality of the situation was unsettling. I quickly closed the drawer, my heart racing, but my curiosity wouldn't let me leave just yet. Despite the initial shock, I felt compelled to understand why these bodies were so well preserved and, more perplexingly, why they were here at all. That I opened another drawer, revealing the body of an elderly woman, already recently deceased. Her expression was both serene and haunting. Each drawer I opened unveiled more individuals of all ages, preserved in time as if they were merely in a deep sleep. I realized these were not just any bodies. They were unclaimed and forgotten by the world outside. Yet here they lay, cared for by someone unknown. This realization stirred a mix of tenderness and unease within me. Who was looking after this place, and to what end? As my flashlight flickered, it cast eerie shadows across the cold metallic surfaces of the morgue. It was then that I noticed something peculiar about the far wall. It shimmered slightly, a distortion in the air that I initially thought was an illusion. However, as I drew closer, the wall seemed to pulse, and I heard a faint, almost unnoticeable sound, a heartbeat resonating from within. When I touched the wall, It was cold yet vibrating under my fingers, as if it were alive. The heartbeat intensified, syncing with a low mechanical hum that filled the room, emanating from behind the wall. Driven by curiosity, I searched for a means to uncover whatever lay hidden. Along the baseboard, I discovered a small, almost imperceptible latch. Pulling it released a concealed door that swung open, revealing a narrow passage lined with dusty pipes and flickering lights. As I ventured through, the passage led me to a deeper section of the hospital, a secret laboratory that was a remnant of a bygone era, filled with old medical equipment and vials of preservatives. Here, the bodies were treated and kept in a state of preservation for reasons I could only wonder about. This lab functioned as a time capsule, where the complexities of medical ethics and personal grief collided in unsettling ways. Scattered notes indicated ongoing experiments that explored preservation techniques, blurring the lines between life and death. Standing amidst this revelation, I felt a blend of awe and horror. St. Michael held secrets that were darker and deeper than I had ever imagined. As I left the morgue, the weight of my discoveries settled heavily on my shoulders. The hospital was not just a refuge for the living. It served as a vault for the dead, protecting its secrets with a silent, solemn dignity. In the shadowy halls of St. Michael Hospital, every corner whispered stories of the past, revealing layers of mystery that intertwined the tangible with the spectral. From the enigmatic corridors that stretched into darkness to the lamenting statue echoing the sorrows of lost souls, the hospital was more than a mere structure. It was a repository of human emotions and unresolved stories. As I delved deeper into the heart of St. Michael, each night unfolded new truths, each one more compelling and haunting than the last. The morgue, with its preserved bodies and hidden laboratory, was perhaps the most profound discovery. It challenged the boundaries between life and death, posing ethical questions that were both unsettling and necessary. The spirits, like Elias, who lingered in the shadows, were not merely echoes of the past but guardians of these secrets, each seeking solace or release. The journey through St. Michael was not just about unearthing the hidden facets of the hospital, but also about understanding the significance of memory and legacy. These spirits and their stories highlighted the profound impact of our actions and the echoes they leave behind. In a sense, the hospital itself was a living entity, breathing through its broken windows, its heartbeat reflected in the ticking of a backward clock. As dawn broke over St. Michael, casting light into its darkest corners, my journey transformed. The responsibility of bearing witness to its secrets now rested with those who dared to listen, explore, and remember. The whispers in the ventilation and the cries of the angels served as a reminder that history, no matter how buried or forgotten, will always find a way to be heard. In conclusion, St. Michael Hospital stands as a monument not to despair but to the resilience of the human spirit. It challenges us to confront the past, no matter how uncomfortable, and encourages us to learn from it, ensuring that the lessons of yesterday do not morph into the regrets of tomorrow. As the guardian of these stories, I invite all who seek the truth to step into the shadows, listen to the whispers, and let the tales of St. Michael guide you toward a deeper understanding of both the past and yourselves.